Imagine being cast out by your own family, left to fend for yourself in a harsh and unforgiving world, only to rise from rejection to become a mighty warrior and leader. Jephthah's story is one of resilience, faith, and ultimately a heart-wrenching tragedy. His journey from outcast to conqueror is filled with victories, vows, and a fateful decision that would change his life forever. What if your greatest victory came at the highest cost imaginable? Jephthah's life forces us to confront the profound truth that sometimes, even our greatest moments of triumph carry unintended consequences. To understand Jephthah's significance, we must first step back into the chaotic period of Israel's history, known as the time of the Judges. This was an era marked by cycles of rebellion, oppression, and divine intervention. The Israelites, having settled in the Promised Land, repeatedly turned away from God, falling into idolatry and disobedience. As a result, God allowed their enemies to rise against them. And among these foes were the Ammonites, a relentless and brutal force that sought to claim Israel's lands and subjugate its people. The Ammonites, driven by greed and vengeance, did not simply seek territorial expansion. They aimed to erase Israel's identity and humiliate them before their God. It was in this climate of desperation and uncertainty that Jephthah's story unfolds. Born to Gilead, a prominent Israelite, and a woman labeled as a harlot, Jephthah was never fully accepted by his own people. His half-brothers, born to Gilead's lawful wife, saw him as an illegitimate stain on their family's honor. They drove him out, forcing him into exile in the barren lands of Tob. Here, far from the comforts of home, Jephthah gathered around him a band of outlaws, men rejected by society, fighters, survivors, and wanderers who had nothing to lose. In the crucible of hardship, Jephthah was shaped into a formidable leader. His band of warriors lived by their own code, bound by loyalty forged in the fires of survival. Despite his exile, Jephthah's reputation as a warrior and leader grew. Tales of his courage spread, and the very people who had cast him out soon found themselves in dire need of his strength. The Ammonites had waged a brutal campaign against Israel, and no one among the elders of Gilead possessed the ability to lead the people to victory. With their backs against the wall, they swallowed their pride and sought out the man they had once scorned. The irony was unmistakable. Jephthah, the rejected son, was now the nation's last hope. But Jephthah was no fool. When the elders of Gilead came to him with their desperate plea, he did not rush to accept their offer. He demanded guarantees. If he were to risk his life and the lives of his men, he wanted assurance that he would not simply be cast aside again once the battle was over. In a moment of reluctant humility, the elders agreed, swearing before God that Jephthah would rule over them should he lead them to victory. This negotiation marked a turning point in his life, as he transitioned from an outlaw to a legitimate leader, recognized not just for his strength, but for his wisdom and strategy. Jephthah's rise to power was not just a story of personal redemption, but also a testament to God's providence and the way he often chooses the least likely individuals to fulfill his purposes. From a despised outcast to the commander of Israel's forces, Jephthah embodied the resilience and determination required of a leader. However, as with many figures of the Bible, his journey was not without flaws. In his zeal and desperation, Jephthah would make a rash vow that would cast a long shadow over his legacy and ultimately cost him dearly. Israel's battle against the Ammonites was not merely a military conflict, it was a spiritual one. The Ammonites claimed that Israel had unjustly taken their land centuries earlier during the Exodus from Egypt, and they sought to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Jephthah, in an effort to resolve the dispute without bloodshed, sent messengers to the king of Ammon, recounting Israel's history and God's guidance in their journey. His argument was clear and grounded in truth, but the Ammonites were unwilling to listen. War was inevitable. As Jephthah prepared for battle, he made a fateful vow to God, one that would become the most tragic element of his story. In a moment of passion and desperation, he swore that if God granted him victory over the Ammonites, he would offer as a burnt sacrifice the first thing that came out of his house to greet him upon his return. It was a vow made with the best of intentions, but with devastating consequences. Little did he know that his joy of victory would soon be overshadowed by unimaginable sorrow. Victory came swiftly, Under Jephthah's command, the Israelites crushed the Ammonites, reclaiming their territory and restoring their dignity. But as Jephthah returned home, triumphant and eager to share the good news, his heart was shattered. Emerging from his house to greet him was not a servant or an animal as he had hoped, but his only daughter. His pride, his joy, the light of his life. The weight of his vow pressed down on him like a crushing boulder, and he realized that his greatest triumph had come at the greatest personal cost. Jephthah's story begins with his birth, a moment that should have been a source of joy, but instead marked the beginning of a lifetime of struggle and rejection. He was the son of Gilead, a respected Israelite, and a woman described only as a harlot. From the moment he was born, Jephthah was branded with a stigma that would follow him throughout his life. In a society where lineage and legitimacy were everything, his very existence was seen as a blemish on his father's household. The whispers of disgrace followed him through the corridors of his home, and the unkind stares of the townspeople were constant reminders that he was different, an outsider even within his own family. As Jephthah grew, so did the resentment from his half-brothers, the legitimate sons of Gilead's lawful wife. They viewed him not as family, but as an intruder, an outsider who had no rightful place among them. Their jealousy and pride festered over the years until it reached a breaking point. They could no longer tolerate his presence, fearing that he might one day lay claim to their inheritance. The confrontation that followed was brutal, not just in words, but in actions. They forcefully expelled him from the house, stripping him of his dignity and his birthright. Jephthah's protests fell on deaf ears. Despite his father's silence, Gilead's influence could not protect him from the rejection that came from his own flesh and blood. He was cast out with nothing but his will to survive. The streets of his homeland, once familiar and comforting, became hostile and unforgiving. Friends turned away, and doors that were once open to him were now firmly shut. Jephthah wandered the outskirts of the city, his heart heavy with betrayal and his mind clouded with questions. Why was he condemned for something beyond his control? Why was he made to bear the shame of his birth? But life had little patience for self-pity, and soon he found himself moving beyond the borders of Gilead, seeking refuge in the unknown. Banished from his father's house, Jephthah found himself alone, forced to fend for himself in the harsh wilderness. But even in exile, he refused to succumb to despair. Instead, he made his way to the land of Tob, a rugged and lawless region where outcasts, fugitives, and misfits gathered. It was here, among the broken and the rejected, that Jephthah found his new family. These were men who, like him, had been cast aside by society, warriors hardened by life's cruelties, men who understood the language of survival. They did not ask about his past, nor did they judge him for his origins. In their eyes, he was not an outcast, he was a leader in the making. Life in Tob was harsh, but it was here that Jephthah honed his skills as a leader and warrior. He learned to survive in the unforgiving landscape, leading his band of misfits with a combination of wisdom, strategy, and sheer resilience. Each battle they fought, each hardship they overcame, molded Jephthah into a man of unshakable determination. He became a figure of both fear and respect, his reputation spreading far beyond the borders of Tob. He was no longer just the son of a harlot. He was a leader, a warrior, and a man to be reckoned with. The men of Tob followed him not because of his birthright, but because of his strength and vision. Jephthah led them with a fierce sense of justice, a deep understanding of strategy, and an uncanny ability to turn chaos into opportunity. His leadership was not born out of entitlement, but out of necessity. Every raid they undertook, every skirmish they survived, was another step toward earning their place in the world. Jephthah's wisdom in battle became legendary, and soon whispers of his exploits reached the ears of the very people who had once rejected him. Despite his success in Tob, Jephthah carried the weight of rejection in his heart. No amount of victories could erase the pain of being cast out by his own family. This wound, though hidden beneath a hardened exterior, would shape every decision he made in the years to come. It gave him a deep empathy for the outcasts and the downtrodden, but it also fostered a fierce desire to prove himself, to show the very people who had rejected him that he was more than the circumstances of his birth. One can only imagine the thoughts that filled Jephthah's mind during the quiet nights in Tob. Did he long to return home, to prove his worth to those who had cast him out? Did he feel anger, bitterness, or a longing for acceptance? Whatever emotions he wrestled with, they were channeled into action. He worked tirelessly to build something out of nothing, to carve a place for himself in a world that had already decided he was unworthy. Jephthah's upbringing in the land of Tob taught him valuable lessons that no comfortable home in Gilead could have provided. He learned the value of loyalty, the unwavering bond forged in hardship with his men. He understood the necessity of resilience, the power of adapting to circumstances beyond his control, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. These were lessons that would serve him well when the elders of Gilead would eventually come knocking at his door, desperate for the leadership they had once scorned. His leadership style in Tob was built on mutual respect and merit, rather than entitlement and privilege. Unlike the rulers of Israel who inherited power, Jephthah earned every ounce of respect through action, through battle, and through the wisdom he displayed in every decision. He was not just a warrior. He was a strategist who understood the importance of patience and careful planning. His ability to see beyond the immediate battle and anticipate future challenges made him a formidable leader, feared by his enemies and respected by his followers. Years passed in Tob, and Jephthah's influence grew beyond the wild lands where he had taken refuge. Messengers brought news of Gilead's growing troubles. The Ammonites were on the march, threatening to overrun Israel's territory. The elders who had once cast him aside were now desperate, seeking someone who could save them from destruction. And they knew there was only one man fit for the job: Jephthah, the outcast who had become a legend. Years passed, and Jephthah's name echoed beyond the rugged hills of Tob, reaching the ears of those who once cast him out. Gilead, his homeland, stood on the brink of destruction. The Ammonites, a fierce and relentless enemy, had launched a brutal campaign against Israel, sweeping through its lands like an unstoppable tide. Town after town fell to their relentless assaults, and the people of Gilead found themselves gripped by fear and uncertainty. Their once proud armies were fragmented, their leaders indecisive, and their faith in victory dwindling with each passing day. The elders of Gilead, once powerful and secure, now found themselves desperate, searching for someone, anyone, who could stand against the tide of destruction. And as they searched for salvation, one name kept surfacing: Jephthah. The irony was undeniable. The same people who had once driven him away in shame now whispered his name with hope and longing. They remembered the tales of his battles in Tob, of how he had risen from an outcast to a feared leader, commanding men who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. His reputation as a strategist, a warrior, and a man of unshakable resolve preceded him. But would he answer their call? Would the man they had rejected be willing to fight for them now? Driven by desperation, the elders of Gilead made the long and humiliating journey to Tob. Their robes, once symbols of authority and power, now seemed worn and heavy with the weight of their failure. As they approached Jephthah's stronghold, they found him surrounded by his band of hardened warriors, men who had followed him through years of hardship and conflict. The tension was thick in the air as the elders stood before him. Faces that once bore scorn and rejection now etched with humility and pleading. Jephthah listened as they spoke, their voices heavy with desperation. "Come and be our commander," they implored. "Lead us against the Ammonites, and we will follow you." The irony was not lost on him. His eyes, sharp and calculating, studied the faces of the men who once deemed him unworthy of his father's inheritance. He could feel the sting of old wounds reopening, the memories of his rejection flooding back. But beneath the pain, there was something else, an opportunity. Instead of responding with anger or bitterness, Jephthah met their plea with careful consideration. He was no longer the desperate young man who had been cast out. He was now a seasoned leader, a man who understood the price of leadership. He asked them a pointed question, his voice steady but firm. "Did you not hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you are in distress?" His words cut through the air like a blade, forcing the elders to acknowledge their past wrongs. The elders, humbled and desperate, did not attempt to deny their past actions. "We know we have wronged you," they admitted. "But if you lead us now, you will rule over all of Gilead." They were not just offering him a temporary command. They were willing to make him their leader, to restore what they had once taken from him. It was an offer that could not be ignored. But Jephthah, ever cautious, knew that words could be fleeting. He needed guarantees. He needed to ensure that this time his position would be secure. And so, in a move that displayed his wisdom and shrewdness, Jephthah did not accept their offer outright. Instead, he negotiated. He made them swear before the Lord, the highest authority they all recognized, that if he led them to victory, they would indeed make him their ruler. It was not enough to take them at their word. He needed divine assurance that history would not repeat itself. The elders, knowing they had no other choice, agreed to the terms, and Jephthah's return to Gilead was sealed. His return, however, was not triumphant in the way one might expect. As he walked through the streets of his homeland, the eyes that once glared at him with contempt now watched with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Some whispered in awe, recognizing the transformation that exile had wrought in him. Others watched warily, unsure if the man they had wronged could truly save them. Jephthah, however, did not concern himself with their doubts. His focus was singular: victory. With his authority now secured, Jephthah wasted no time in preparing for war. He assessed the state of Gilead's defenses, the strength of its remaining forces, and the resources available. His years in Tob had taught him to fight with whatever was at hand, and he brought that same resourcefulness to Gilead's weary army. He restructured their ranks, instilled discipline where there was disorder, and reignited a sense of purpose in their hearts. He was not just preparing them for battle, he was preparing them to believe in themselves again. As the Ammonites loomed on the horizon, Jephthah knew that war was inevitable. But before drawing his sword, he sought diplomacy. Sending messengers to the king of Ammon, he attempted to resolve the conflict through dialogue. His message was clear and rooted in truth. Israel had not stolen the Ammonites' land. It had been given to them by God. The Ammonites, however, were not interested in history or negotiations. They wanted war, and war they would have. With his position secured and the weight of Gilead's hope resting on his shoulders, Jephthah turned his attention to the pressing task ahead: war. The Ammonites were not an enemy to be underestimated. They were ruthless, well-equipped, and emboldened by years of unchecked aggression. To stand against them required more than brute force. It demanded strategy, diplomacy, and unwavering leadership. Jephthah understood that the battlefield was as much a place of the mind as it was of the sword. His first step was to solidify his authority over the fragmented tribes of Gilead. While the elders had pledged their allegiance, Jephthah knew that true leadership had to be earned, not merely given. He called together the men of Gilead, speaking with clarity and conviction, instilling in them a sense of purpose beyond survival. He reminded them that this battle was not just for land or honor. It was a fight for their future, for the generations to come. His words, owned by years of hardship and leadership in Tob, resonated deeply. The men who had once doubted him now saw in him a leader worth following. With morale lifted, Jephthah moved swiftly to assess his resources. The armies of Gilead were worn from years of oppression, their weapons dull, their strategies outdated. Jephthah, however, was a man who thrived in adversity. He reorganized the ranks, identifying skilled fighters, strategists, and leaders who could help him reshape the army into a disciplined and effective force. He knew that victory would not come from sheer numbers alone, but from precision, preparation, and the right tactics. Recognizing the strategic importance of alliances, Jephthah reached out to neighboring tribes who shared Israel's fear of the Ammonites. He appealed to their common heritage and the threat they collectively faced, forging temporary coalitions that would strengthen Gilead's position. Through careful negotiations, he secured supplies, reinforcements, and intelligence that provided a deeper understanding of the enemy's movements and vulnerabilities. His ability to navigate diplomacy with the same tenacity he wielded in battle became a crucial advantage. Preparation for war extended beyond the physical. Jephthah, deeply aware of the spiritual nature of their conflict, called upon the people to seek God's guidance. He led them in fasting and prayer, acknowledging that their strength alone was insufficient without divine intervention. The people of Gilead, inspired by his faith and determination, responded with renewed commitment, seeing in Jephthah a leader who understood both the weight of war and the importance of spiritual fortitude. Strategically, Jephthah devised a multi-pronged approach to the coming conflict. He studied the terrain, choosing battlegrounds that would give his forces an advantage. He implemented unconventional tactics that confused and outmaneuvered the Ammonites, leveraging speed and precision over brute force. He set up supply lines, ensured his soldiers were well fed and rested, and established a network of scouts to track enemy movements. Every move was calculated, every decision purposeful. Yet, despite his meticulous planning, Jephthah knew that war was unpredictable. His leadership would be tested in the fires of battle, and he was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him, but he carried it with the confidence of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for such a moment. With the army of Gilead now prepared, Jephthah stood at the forefront of a nation on the brink of war. The Ammonites, emboldened by years of unchecked aggression, had entrenched themselves in the region, confident that Israel lacked the unity and strength to resist them. But Jephthah was not a man to be intimidated by numbers or reputations. He understood that victory was not determined solely by strength, but by leadership, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Before leading his men into battle, Jephthah took one final step. He attempted diplomacy. He sent messengers to the king of Ammon, demanding to know the reason for their aggression and asserting Israel's right to the land they occupied. His approach was not one of submission, but of reason and confidence. In a carefully worded message, Jephthah recounted Israel's history, explaining how God had delivered the land into their hands generations ago. He reminded the Ammonites that Israel had never wrongfully taken what was not theirs, but had settled in lands given to them by divine providence. This was not just a political statement, it was a declaration of Israel's faith and identity. The Ammonite king, however, dismissed Jephthah's message with arrogance. He was not interested in history or reason. He wanted conquest. His refusal left Jephthah with no choice but to fight. But rather than viewing this rejection as a failure, Jephthah saw it as confirmation of what he had long suspected. The Ammonites would only be stopped by force. Jephthah addressed his troops with a speech that would rally their spirits and cement their resolve. He reminded them of the injustices they had suffered, the years of oppression they had endured, and the families they were fighting to protect. His words were not those of a king commanding blind obedience, but of a leader who understood the cost of war and the value of unity. "We do not fight for land alone," he declared, "but for our faith, our families, and the generations yet to come." The soldiers, once fearful and fragmented, now stood united behind him, ready to follow him into battle. The march toward the battlefield was swift and deliberate. Jephthah knew that striking first would give his forces the advantage, catching the Ammonites off guard before they could fully mobilize. He split his forces into strategic units, using the terrain to his advantage. With his deep understanding of guerrilla tactics honed in the wilderness of Tob, he employed deception, flanking maneuvers, and sudden strikes to disrupt the enemy's formations. The Ammonites, expecting a disorganized and weakened opposition, were met instead with precision and calculated force. The Ammonites, known for their brutal and relentless style of warfare, met the Israelites head-on, confident in their superior numbers. But Jephthah's strategic brilliance turned their strength into their downfall. He used their overconfidence against them, drawing them into narrow passes where their numbers became a liability rather than an advantage. With quick strikes and masterful coordination, the forces of Gilead struck deep into the heart of the enemy's ranks, breaking their lines and forcing them into disarray. Throughout the battle, Jephthah remained at the front, leading his men with a fearless determination. His presence on the battlefield was not just symbolic. It was a source of inspiration to his troops. They fought not only for their survival, but for a leader they believed in. One who had faced rejection and hardship, yet stood before them as a beacon of hope and resilience. Victory, though hard-fought, was decisive. The Ammonites, caught off guard and overwhelmed by Jephthah's relentless tactics, were driven from the land they sought to claim. The victory was not just a military triumph, but a reclaiming of Israel's dignity and independence. The people of Gilead, once divided and downtrodden, now stood proud and unified, knowing that they had overcome one of their most formidable foes under the leadership of a man they had once rejected. Yet, even in the midst of celebration, Jephthah knew that the cost of war extended beyond the battlefield. He had won the battle, but he understood that true leadership would require much more than victory in combat. As he surveyed the aftermath, the fallen soldiers, the grieving families, he knew that his leadership journey was far from over. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon him, and though the immediate threat was vanquished, challenges still lay ahead. The dust of battle had settled, and the echoes of clashing swords were replaced by the cries of victory. Jephthah had led Gilead to a triumphant conquest, reclaiming their land and dignity from the Ammonites. The people, once fragmented and hopeless, now looked to their new leader with admiration and gratitude. Yet, amidst the celebration, Jephthah carried a burden that no one else could see. Victory in war often comes with unseen costs, and for Jephthah, those costs were about to become tragically real. As the army made its way back home, the weight of his vow loomed heavily in his mind. Before the battle, in a moment of fervor and desperation, Jephthah had made a solemn promise to God, one that he now dreaded fulfilling. He had vowed that if the Lord granted him victory, he would offer as a burnt sacrifice the first thing that emerged from the doors of his house upon his return. In the heat of battle, such a promise had seemed like an act of devotion. But now, with the victory secured, the implications of his words haunted him. As they approached his home, Jephthah's heart pounded with unease. His warriors marched proudly, the people of Gilead lined the streets to welcome their hero, and trumpets filled the air with joyful noise. Then, in a moment that would forever alter the course of his life, his only daughter stepped out to greet him, dancing with tambourines in hand, her face beaming with pride and love. The crowd cheered, but Jephthah's world came crashing down. In that instant, the weight of his hasty vow pressed down upon him with crushing force. Tearing his clothes in anguish, Jephthah cried out, "My daughter, you have brought me low, and you have become the cause of my trouble, for I have made a vow to the Lord, and I cannot take it back." The once mighty warrior who had stood unshaken against the Ammonites now found himself broken, trapped by his own words. His daughter, wise beyond her years, understood the gravity of her father's predicament. With a grace that defied the horror of the moment, she accepted her fate, asking only for time to mourn her life with her friends in the mountains. Jephthah's leadership, once marked by strength and strategy, was now overshadowed by sorrow. This tragic outcome, born not of battle, but of an impulsive promise, served as a powerful reminder of the dangers of rash decisions, even in moments of triumph. It was a lesson that leadership required wisdom, not just in war, but in words and actions. Despite his military success, Jephthah's story would forever be remembered for this heart-wrenching sacrifice. Though devastated, Jephthah remained committed to his duty as leader of Gilead. He understood that his personal grief could not overshadow the needs of the people. In the aftermath of the war, he worked tirelessly to secure the borders, restore order, and rebuild what had been lost. His leadership, though stained by tragedy, continued to inspire loyalty and respect among his followers. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the noise of leadership faded, Jephthah carried the weight of his vow, a constant reminder of the cost of victory. His experience left an indelible mark on Israel's history, a cautionary tale of ambition, devotion, and the profound consequences of spoken commitments. Jephthah's story serves as a testament to the complexity of leadership, the balance between faith and wisdom, and the importance of thoughtful decision-making in moments of desperation. Before the battle against the Ammonites, in a moment of desperation and fervent faith, Jephthah made a vow that would become the most tragic element of his life. Standing before his men, with the weight of Israel's future on his shoulders, he lifted his voice to heaven and declared, "Lord, if you will indeed give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace shall be yours, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. In his mind, it was a grand gesture of faith and devotion, a commitment that would ensure divine favor in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet, even as he uttered the words, a silent shadow of uncertainty crept into his heart. What exactly would that sacrifice be? The battlefield soon became a place of unrelenting fury. The Ammonites, confident in their strength and experience, met the Israelite forces with brutal resistance. But Jephthah, armed with his vow and driven by the urgency of redemption, unleashed a military strategy unlike any they had ever faced. He struck swiftly and decisively, using the knowledge gained from years of leading his band of outcasts in Tob. His forces moved with precision, launching ambushes and executing flanking maneuvers that dismantled the enemy's formations. The once oppressed Israelites, now empowered under Jephthah's leadership, fought with a renewed sense of purpose, their swords fueled by the hope of reclaiming their homeland. As the battle raged on, Jephthah's faith remained unwavering, and his leadership inspired his troops to fight with extraordinary valor. Town after town fell before them, and the Ammonites, once so sure of their victory, found themselves retreating in disarray. By the time the sun set on the battlefield, Israel had secured a monumental victory. The people rejoiced, their shouts of triumph ringing through the land. And for the first time in years, hope shone bright over Gilead. Yet, amidst the celebration, Jephthah could not shake the gnawing weight of his vow. He had made a promise to the Lord, one that he could not take back. As Jephthah and his men returned home, the weight of his words pressed heavily upon his chest. The streets of Gilead were lined with cheering crowds, the sound of celebration filling the air. Yet, his mind was consumed with the inevitable moment that awaited him. His vow, spoken in the heat of desperation, had now become an inescapable reality. With each step closer to his house, dread tightened its grip around his heart. Would it be a servant? Perhaps an animal? He dared not hope, but deep down, fear gnawed at him. Then, as he approached the threshold of his home, the moment he had feared the most unfolded before him. His only daughter, his pride and joy, emerged from the doors of his house, her face radiant with joy, tambourines in hand, dancing in celebration of her father's victory. She was young, full of life, and in that instant, Jephthah's heart shattered. The triumph of war, the restoration of honor, everything paled in comparison to the agony of that single moment. Tearing his garments in anguish, Jephthah cried out, "My daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of my trouble. For I have made a vow to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it." His voice trembled with sorrow, his eyes filled with unshed tears. The weight of the promise bore down on him with relentless force, and the once mighty warrior who had led an army to victory now found himself helpless against the consequences of his own words. His daughter, upon realizing the gravity of her father's vow, displayed a grace and courage beyond her years. With a calmness that defied the tragedy of the moment, she accepted her fate. "My father," she said, "if you have given your word to the Lord, do to me as you have promised, for the Lord has given you victory over your enemies." There was no anger, no resistance, only a quiet understanding that her life, though full of promise, now belonged to a higher purpose. For 2 months, she and her friends retreated to the mountains to mourn. They wept for the dreams left unfulfilled, for the life that would never be, and for the future that had been sacrificed on the altar of a promise made in desperation. The hills echoed with their sorrow, a lament that would be remembered for generations. Each passing day was a reminder that Jephthah's vow, made in haste, had a cost far greater than he had ever imagined. When the time of mourning ended, Jephthah, bound by his sense of duty and his unyielding devotion to the Lord, fulfilled his vow. The precise nature of her fate remains a topic of much debate, whether she was offered as a literal burnt offering or dedicated to lifelong service in the temple. Regardless, the impact of Jephthah's actions was irreversible. The daughter he had cherished above all else was lost to him, and the triumph of war was forever overshadowed by the pain of his promise. The implications of Jephthah's vow extended far beyond his personal grief. His story became a cautionary tale, a sobering reminder of the weight of words spoken in moments of desperation. While his intentions had been noble, they also revealed the human tendency to bargain with God without fully considering the consequences. His vow, meant to secure victory, became his greatest burden. Leaders across generations would reflect on his story as a lesson in the importance of wisdom, patience, and careful discernment in decision-making. Despite his overwhelming grief, Jephthah continued to lead Israel with unwavering commitment. He fulfilled his duties, restored order, and maintained peace. But those closest to him could see that he was never the same again. The exuberance of his early leadership was replaced with a somber wisdom, a realization that power came with a responsibility greater than he had ever anticipated. His daughter's fate was not forgotten. The women of Israel would gather each year to remember her sacrifice, ensuring that the lessons of Jephthah's rash vow were never lost. They mourned not just for the life she had given up, but for the warning her story carried. The warning that passion without wisdom can lead even the greatest of men into tragic circumstances. As Jephthah looked upon his people, now free from the oppression of the Ammonites, he carried the bittersweet knowledge that their freedom had come at a price he would bear for the rest of his life. He had given his word, and though it had secured victory, it had cost him the one thing he treasured most. Victory over the Ammonites should have marked a time of unity and celebration for Israel, but peace was fleeting. Triumph on the battlefield had silenced external threats, but within Israel's borders, new tensions simmered beneath the surface. The tribe of Ephraim, known for their pride and influence, could not bear to see another tribe, especially one they deemed inferior, rise to prominence. Despite Jephthah's decisive leadership that had secured their safety, the Ephraimites harbored jealousy and resentment. Their pride was wounded, and they could not tolerate being left out of the glory of victory. Rather than acknowledging Jephthah's role in delivering Israel from the Ammonites, the Ephraimites instead accused him of acting independently, of waging war without their consultation. They came to him in a fury, their voices laced with arrogance and anger. "Why did you go to fight the Ammonites without calling us to join you?" they demanded. Their words were not born of genuine concern, but of a bruised ego. The reality was simple. When the threat was at its peak, they had done nothing. But now, with the battle won, they sought a share of the honor. Their pride blinded them to the sacrifice and leadership Jephthah had displayed, and their jealousy drove them to the brink of conflict. Jephthah, though weary from the burdens he already carried, met their accusations with patience at first. He reminded them that when Gilead had been under siege, they had called for help, but the Ephraimites had failed to answer. He had not acted out of pride, but out of necessity, leading Gilead into battle when no one else would. "I called you," Jephthah reasoned, "but you did not come to save us from the Ammonites. When I saw that you would not help, I took my life in my hands and crossed over to fight." His words were measured but firm. He was not a man to be trifled with, and he made it clear that his actions had been justified. But the Ephraimites were not satisfied with reason. Their wounded pride turned to threats, and soon those threats escalated to violence. They insulted the men of Gilead, mocking them as outcasts and cowards, belittling Jephthah's men for their heritage and origins. This was not merely an argument over military strategy. It was a full-blown tribal dispute, fueled by years of lingering resentment and pride. The Ephraimites failed to see that their reckless words would lead them to a confrontation they were ill-prepared for. Jephthah, no stranger to conflict, understood that words could only go so far. When it became clear that the Ephraimites sought battle, he did not hesitate. With his forces already battle-hardened from their war against the Ammonites, Jephthah led his men into what would become one of the most infamous civil conflicts in Israel's history. The battle between the men of Gilead and Ephraim was brutal and relentless. It was no longer a fight against an external enemy, but a tragic war between brothers, Israelites shedding the blood of fellow Israelites. Jephthah's leadership during this conflict was marked by decisiveness and a tactical brilliance that once again revealed his deep understanding of warfare. Knowing the terrain well, he positioned his forces strategically, cutting off the Ephraimites' escape routes by seizing control of the Jordan River crossings. This move proved crucial. As the fleeing Ephraimites attempted to cross the river, Jephthah's men devised a simple but effective strategy to distinguish friend from foe. They asked each man to pronounce the word shibboleth. The Ephraimites, with their distinct dialect, mispronounced it as Sibboleth, revealing their identity and sealing their fate. It was a grim yet effective method, and thousands of Ephraimites perished as a result. The aftermath of the battle left Israel fractured and in mourning. What should have been a time of unity and rebuilding had turned into a period of internal strife and bloodshed. Jephthah, though victorious, bore the heavy burden of what had transpired. He had once been an outcast fighting for survival, then a warrior defending his homeland, and now he found himself at the helm of a divided nation, a leader who had seen too much blood spilled, some of it necessary, some of it tragically avoidable. The conflict with the Ephraimites revealed the deep divisions within Israel, the fragile nature of tribal unity, and the dangerous consequences of unchecked pride. For Jephthah, it was a stark reminder that leadership was not just about winning wars, but about managing the delicate balance of power and ego within the people he served. He had proven himself capable in battle, but could he bring unity to a fractured people? That question weighed heavily on him. Could reconciliation have been possible? Could diplomacy have averted such needless bloodshed? These questions, though unanswered, haunted him. Leadership, he realized, was not about personal ambition or validation. It was about serving with wisdom, humility, and patience. And while he had been a capable warrior, the burden of ruling a divided nation tested him in ways no battlefield ever could. Despite the bitter conflict, Jephthah remained committed to his role, ruling Israel for 6 more years. During his reign, he sought to restore stability and order, though the scars of the Ephraimite conflict ran deep. His leadership became a testament to the harsh realities of governance, where success and failure often walked hand in hand, and where victories on the battlefield did not always translate to peace at home. As his years as judge drew to a close, Jephthah's legacy became one of complexity. He was a man of great strength, yet marred by personal tragedy. He was a leader who had brought victory to Israel, but at a cost that would never be forgotten. His story is one that forces us to confront the weight of leadership, the balance between duty and personal sacrifice, the tension between ambition and humility, and the lasting consequences of decisions made in the heat of the moment. In the end, Jephthah's life stands as a powerful reminder of the dangers of pride and the importance of humility in leadership. His conflict with the Ephraimites serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of unity and the devastating impact of internal strife. While his victories secured Israel's safety, they also exposed the deep fractures within the nation, fractures that would continue to challenge future leaders. As Jephthah came to understand, is not measured only in the victories won, but in the burdens borne, the relationships strained, and the sacrifices made along the way. He ruled Israel with the wisdom forged in hardship and the resolve that only experience could bring. But he was never free from the weight of the choices he had made. As Jephthah's years as judge continued, the weight of leadership bore heavily on him. The victories he had won on the battlefield had secured Israel's freedom from external threats, but the scars of internal conflict and personal tragedy remained deeply etched into his soul. He had fought for his people, led them with courage, and made painful sacrifices along the way. But as peace settled over the land, Jephthah faced a different kind of challenge, one that did not require swords or strategy, but wisdom, patience, and resilience. Leading a fractured nation was no easy task. The aftermath of the war with the Ammonites had left Israel exhausted, and the brutal civil conflict with the Ephraimites had deepened tribal divisions. Many in Israel still questioned his leadership, not because of his military prowess, but because of the personal costs that came with it. The tragic loss of his daughter cast a long shadow over his rule, and whispers of his vow followed him wherever he went. There were those who viewed him as a man who had won battles but lost everything else in the process. Yet, despite these challenges, Jephthah remained steadfast in his commitment to Israel. He worked tirelessly to restore stability, ensuring that the fragile peace would endure. He reinforced the borders, strengthened alliances, and sought to heal the wounds left by years of conflict. His leadership, though marked by hardship, was characterized by a deep sense of duty and unwavering faith in God's plan. He had learned that leadership was not just about making decisions in the heat of battle, but about navigating the complexities of human relationships and governance with wisdom and humility. However, Jephthah's leadership was not without its critics. Some of Israel's elders still viewed him as an outsider, a leader who had risen not through noble lineage, but through necessity. Others blamed him for the loss of their fellow Israelites in the Ephraimite conflict, questioning whether his leadership was truly ordained by God, or simply the result of circumstance. The burden of proving himself never seemed to lift, and Jephthah carried it with quiet endurance. Despite the divisions within Israel, Jephthah's rule brought a period of relative peace and stability. He continued to judge the people with fairness, applying the lessons he had learned through years of hardship. His judgments were firm but just, and he sought to govern with the same integrity that had defined his rise to power. Through his leadership, he taught the people of Israel that greatness is not determined by one's origins, but by one's actions and the faith that guides them. Jephthah's story did not end in grandeur or wealth, but in a quiet reflection of the life he had led. He ruled Israel for 6 years, years marked by resilience, heartbreak, and perseverance. Unlike some of the more celebrated judges, his reign was not remembered for its splendor, but for the harsh realities of leadership and the sacrifices required of those who are called to serve. In his final years, Jephthah likely reflected on the choices he had made, the battles he had fought, and the lessons learned through pain and triumph alike. His death, like much of his life, was met with little fanfare. There were no great celebrations, no grand monuments built in his honor. Instead, he was buried in his hometown of Gilead, the very place that had once rejected him, but ultimately turned to him in their hour of need. His tomb stood as a silent reminder of a man who had risen from rejection to leadership, from outcast to deliverer. Though his name was not celebrated with the same reverence as other judges, his impact on Israel was undeniable. Jephthah's legacy is a complicated one, his life a blend of victory and tragedy, strength and sorrow. He is remembered as a man who rose above adversity, but also as a cautionary tale of the dangers of hasty decisions and the weight of responsibility. His infamous vow serves as a stark reminder of the power of words and the unintended consequences they can bring. Leaders in every generation have looked to his story, drawing lessons on the importance of careful deliberation, humility, and the balance between faith and wisdom. One of the most enduring lessons from Jephthah's life is the importance of self-worth and perseverance. Cast out by his family and his people, he did not allow rejection to define him. Instead, he carved out a path of his own, proving that resilience and faith could overcome even the harshest circumstances. His journey teaches that leadership is often forged in the fires of adversity, and true strength is found not in avoiding hardship, but in facing it head-on. Jephthah's life also speaks to the complexities of decision-making in moments of crisis. His vow, made in desperation, stands as a powerful warning against the impulse to make promises without fully understanding their implications. His story encourages leaders to weigh their words carefully, to seek wisdom in moments of uncertainty, and to trust in God without bargaining away the most precious parts of their lives. Furthermore, Jephthah's leadership through Israel's internal conflicts highlights the challenges of maintaining unity in the face of division. The conflict with the Ephraimites revealed the destructive power of pride and rivalry within a nation, and Jephthah's response demonstrated the difficult choices leaders must make to preserve order. His story underscores the need for humility, diplomacy, and the ability to rise above petty disputes for the greater good of the people. Despite the hardships he faced, Jephthah's faith in God never wavered. He understood that his life was part of a greater plan, and though he carried the burden of his mistakes, he remained committed to serving his people to the best of his ability. His life serves as a reminder that faith does not always mean a life free of hardship, but rather the strength to endure and persevere through it. In the annals of Israel's history, Jephthah remains a figure of both admiration and caution. He is remembered for his courage, his strategic brilliance, and his unwavering commitment to his people. Yet his story is also a sobering lesson in the cost of leadership and the consequences of decisions made in haste. It is a reminder that every choice carries weight, and true leadership demands both wisdom and humility. As time passed, the memory of Jephthah's daughter endured, an annual tradition among Israelite women who mourned her fate and honored her sacrifice. Her story became intertwined with his, a poignant reminder of the human cost of leadership and the sometimes inescapable consequences of our choices. Through her, Jephthah's legacy extended beyond military triumphs and governance. It became a lesson passed down through generations, a lesson about the fragility of promises and the importance of wisdom. Jephthah's story is one of contradictions: victory and tragedy, rejection and acceptance, strength and sorrow. He was a man who rose from the depths of disgrace to the heights of leadership, yet his life was forever marred by the weight of a single decision. His legacy is complex, a mixture of admiration and caution, and it speaks to the human experience in profound ways. Jephthah's journey reminds us that leadership is often born out of hardship, and true strength is not measured in victories alone, but in the endurance to face life's harshest realities with faith and resilience. Throughout his life, Jephthah demonstrated remarkable qualities that all leaders and believers can learn from: courage in the face of rejection, unwavering faith despite uncertainty, and the determination to fight for what is right. Yet his story also serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of wisdom and discernment. His tragic vow to God, made in a moment of desperation, teaches us the critical lesson that our words carry weight, and decisions made in haste can have far-reaching consequences. As we reflect on his life, we are reminded that even the strongest among us can falter when we fail to seek wisdom in our choices. Jephthah's legacy offers valuable lessons for modern-day leaders, believers, and anyone facing difficult decisions. First, his story teaches us that rejection does not define our destiny. Though cast out by his own family and society, Jephthah did not allow bitterness to consume him. Instead, he used his pain as fuel to forge a new path, proving that resilience and faith can turn even the harshest circumstances into opportunities for growth and success. In our own lives, we too may face rejection, whether in relationships, careers, or personal struggles. But Jephthah's life encourages us to rise above it, trusting that God has a purpose for every trial we endure. Second, Jephthah's journey reminds us of the need for humility in leadership. Despite his success, his inability to control his emotions and pride during the conflict with the Ephraimites led to unnecessary bloodshed and division. Leaders today must recognize that true leadership is not about seeking personal glory, but about serving with wisdom, patience, and humility. Jephthah's life challenges us to lead with integrity, to seek reconciliation where possible, and to value unity over pride. Perhaps the most significant lesson from Jephthah's story is the power and consequence of our words. His vow, made with the best of intentions, ultimately cost him his most cherished possession, his only daughter. This serves as a warning to us all. Words spoken in desperation, without thought or wisdom, can lead to unintended suffering. As believers, we are called to be mindful of our commitments, to seek God's guidance in all our decisions, and to trust in His plans, rather than attempting to secure outcomes through rash promises. As we conclude Jephthah's story, let us take these lessons to heart. Let us learn from the past, striving to make wiser choices today. We are not defined by our past mistakes, but by how we respond to them. Just as Jephthah found redemption through service, so too can we find hope and purpose in our faith journey by trusting in God's wisdom and timing. Now I invite you to join me in a prayer, a moment to reflect and ask for God's guidance in our own lives. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, thank you for the life of Jephthah and the lessons we have learned through his story. Help us to rise above rejection, to lead with humility, and to make decisions with wisdom and discernment. Teach us to trust in you fully, knowing that your plans are greater than our own. Give us the strength to walk in faith even when the path is uncertain. Lord, guard our hearts and minds so that our words and actions align with your will. We surrender our fears, our doubts, and our desires to you, trusting in your perfect guidance. In Jesus' name, amen. Before we end this video, take a moment to like this video, comment below with your thoughts or what you've learned from Jephthah's story, and subscribe to this channel for more inspiring biblical lessons. Your support helps us continue sharing God's word and bringing meaningful content to your life. We are so grateful for your time and for being part of this journey with us. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video. Stay blessed, stay strong, and remember, God is always with you.